Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's exciting to be here. I was remarking earlier before, as we were chatting, that there's so much that has changed even within the last couple of years. I can't believe it'll be 7 years ago that I started UnCollege in January. And if you'd told me 7 years ago that higher education would actually be actively trying to change, I would not have believed you. And so I'm left feeling really optimistic that we can actually achieve some of the change that we're all talking about, and that people are moving in the right direction. So I started UnCollege when I was a freshman in college. I was frustrated with my experience. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I took it upon myself to say, all right, I'm gonna change something. But there were a lot of different factors that were going into that decision, and I think there was a zeitgeist around 2010, 2011 when I was in school for the first time that really made a confluence of factors that made it the right time to say, maybe something should change. I'm gonna take a gander and guess that I'm probably the least educated person in this room. But I asked this question because I think we think about education as measured by degrees, and degrees are really just a signal. They're a proxy for saying that we have a certain kind of skill. I think the more relevant question is really, pointing out that there are very, very few of us who actually knew what we wanted to do when we grew up, when we were a kid. I certainly didn't. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a farmer. It's not how it's turned out. But just take a moment to think about what you dreamed of going to be when you grew up, and realize that probably isn't very congruent with how your path actually turned out. So it's been really amazing over the course of the last 7 years as UnCollege turned from a media and advocacy group. I wrote a book, as mentioned, and then we actually started running educational programs when students started saying, hey, like that looks like me. I've been trying to find a word and a vocabulary and a way to describe who I am as a self-directed person, but there's no place for me to go. And so we put together a program, which I will come back and talk about later, but really was driving those people to be willing to stick their neck out and put their hand up and say, hey, I want to do something different. I am not wanting to follow a prescribed path. Was a couple of things. One was that it had gotten really, really expensive in the States because there weren't incentive structures that kept costs in check. Higher education had gone through the roof, and so in the years following the financial crisis, it became less clear that going to college was the right thing to do in a down economy, which has historically been the case. Two, there's actually been a pretty precipitous decline. The New America Foundation did some work looking at earnings outcomes from federal financial aid recipients. And at 25% of the schools, 50% of students didn't show any earning gains 10 years down the line. Now, there were plenty of bad actors in this group and people who weren't actually teaching very relevant schools, but there were some elite and prestigious schools on that list as well, which just, again, goes to show that there's a lack of trust in the system, and for good reason. And so we see all these big consulting reports looking at why there's so many youth unemployed, why are people so skeptical of whether or not their post-secondary education has actually improved their chances of finding a job. And over again, these stats and attitudes translated very, very directly into being able to launch what became UnCollege. At the end of the day, it's that the cost is very real, and so you get a student who's coming out of high school who says, I'm hardworking and ambitious, but I don't know exactly what I want to do when I grow up. I'm unsure that going to UCLA or UC Berkeley, if I grew up in California, is necessarily the right path, because even those have gotten to be $30,000 or $40,000 a year. I'm going to take the time to do something else and to stop and think and evaluate what I want to do. And so it's with that over the course of the last 5 years, we've been able to build UnCollege into an alternative. It's still very much early and very much an experiment, but this year we'll run about 75 students through the program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the program looks like, on our orientation towards it, and how we're starting to work with colleges and universities. So we see that the economy and the skills that you need to succeed are changing very rapidly in a way that traditional educational institutions are not well designed to adapt to. I have a friend who's a professor at UC Davis, and he was telling me that they've been trying to change the textbook in their biology class for nearly 2 decades, and they still haven't gotten the faculty together to agree to do this. Guidance is frequently putting a checklist together to make sure that you graduate on time, that you can get a seat in the right class, rather than starting out with a one-to-one relationship of saying, hey, who are you as an 18-year-old? Who do you want to be? Where do you want to go from here? And let's collectively work together to describe the right path. No one's asking the question of, what do you really want to learn? And then defining a path from there. All too frequently, you get a student who's coming out of high school and is making a choice about what they want to do without having the data to back up that choice. Across the US, Gallup found that 60% of people feel they were not socially or emotionally aware or ready for university. And so what it really comes back to is answering this question of, how do we help young people get both an affordable but also a meaningful education? So as I was starting to think about this, when I started designing the gap year program, the first really obvious question that came up is, why is college 4 years in the States? In most other parts of the world, college bachelor's degrees are typically completed in 3 years. And started thinking about, okay, well, if there's this extra time, how might you design an experience to get someone to be really self-aware and self-motivated and self-critical during that time, so that they can then go and make the most of their experience in university? Doing some more research, I realized that these countries all have incredibly productive economies for their size, and guess what they have in common is that they all have some sort of national service program. And so I started to think about, okay, well, if we were to design a program, what might that look like? What's the program that I wish had existed when I was coming out of high school? This is Carrie. Carrie went through the program 2 years ago. She's now going to Pennsylvania University, or rather Temple, on a full ride, which she got in many ways in part because of the experience that she had on the gap year program. But she was the kind of person who was smart and motivated and hardworking and was self-aware enough to say, hey, I'm actually not ready to go to university. I want to take some time to understand who I am and what I'm going to learn before I make the commitment to go to college for 4 years. So that's what UnCollege is today. We've run a couple hundred students through the program at this point. It has historically been a 9-month program. We're now building a new semester-long offering, and the core of the program really involves service learning, so going and working abroad and volunteering for about 10 weeks, and then 10 weeks of a personal development boot camp where every student is working one-on-one with a coach and developing what we think of as meta-learning skills, the skills that make you a better and more effective learner. It's things like how to negotiate, communicate, keep yourself motivated, develop good work-study habits, those kinds of things, rather than approaching it from a subject matter orientation. So I really got involved in startups back when I was in high school. I worked at a company called Zinch that actually helps students get into college. This was a picture of my parents the day that I told them I was dropping out of high school. Not really, but I would get them up a little bit too early, and they were none too pleased. But I have to give my parents credit. When I said I wanted to do something different, their response was yes and okay. Like let's figure out what that looks like. And so we came to unschooling, which is what was the genesis for UnCollege. And again, not a new concept. It's been around since the 70s or 80s. And there's a lot of deschooling work, and even Illich, and lots of philosophers from back then started talking about this concept of what if you could start with the seed of curiosity from the child to help them and allow them to drive their own learning. So that's what unschooling was, and for me, it turned into a wonderful experience. I spent my middle school and high school years doing things that I would never have done otherwise. That turned into eventually writing this book, which Penguin published in 2013, and wanting to get back to this question of how do we help people learn how to learn. What I learned from doing interviews for my book with a wide variety of people who had gone on to become everything from DJs to doctors was that they'd gotten really good at these meta-learning skills. And it was that they were really good at figuring out how to do things that they'd never done before. And so that research really inspired what makes the core of the UnCollege Gap Year program today. Every student has a coach that they work with one-on-one with. To the extent that's possible, everything is designed to be orientated around a real-world project-based experience. It's not a place to go if you want a vacation or to slack off. It's a very intense learning experience. And what's been exciting to see is just how much larger the opportunity space there is than when we first started. When we first started, we thought we were going to design a 9-month college alternative, and we were wrong about that. The vast majority of people need to take some time between 18 to 22 and figure out who they are and how they learn. But what we saw was that parents and students were gravitating towards the program, referring their friends and saying, yes, I want my student to have this kind of experience before I go to college, before they go to college, so that they can make the most of the experience. So the program involves a 3-month voyage, a 3-month launch and professional development boot camp in San Francisco, and then 3 months of work experience. Like I said, there's also a new semester-long program that is just the first 2 phases of the program. What's been really interesting to see is just how much someone can grow in a short period of time if you give them the opportunity to believe in themselves and work very intensely. It's in the middle of last year. That's not where I thought that I was. In the middle of last year, there was a Gallup study that came out that here we are. That these 6 different experiences, the more of them that you had, you were more likely to have better outcomes. Someone who cares about you as a person, someone who makes you excited about learning, having a mentor or working on a long-term project, having a job or real-world experience where they can apply what they're learning, and being involved in extracurriculars. So across these experiences, the more of them that you had, the more likely you were to graduate on time, to be engaged at work, to be thriving in elements of well-being, and to be prepared for life. And we looked at this and said, the program that we designed really has all of those things at its core. So it's been exciting to see how we can start to work with colleges in this new time. The company is working with 2 colleges to pilot a semester-long program and that'll be announced in a few weeks, which I'm very excited about. And so it's been really interesting to go from UnCollege to UnCollege, and to see where we can get by working together. Like I said when I started, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm hopeful that with enough of the right heads asking the right questions and thinking about the right things, that we can actually make a dent in bringing about how we learn and change, really this time. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.